This morning we're going to tie a saltwater fly. This is a really good redfish fly, and it's really good for pretty much anything that likes shrimp, which would take into account virtually everything that lives in salt water. My dad used to say that anything that lives in salt water likes shrimp, and anything that lives in freshwater likes crawfish, and I believe that's a pretty accurate assessment. The hook that we're using this morning is kind of a different hook for fly tying. This is an octopus circle hook, a Gamakatsu size 2. It's a very good, very strong hook. The very short bend of the hook, short shank configuration, makes it harder for saltwater fish like permit and maybe small tarpon and redfish, speckled trout. Makes it a little bit harder for them to throw that hook when they jump and waggle their head. So what we're going to use here is, this is a red, I'm using Danville in this case. I'm going to make a good underlayment of a red nylon here, and we don't have to be really too particular about getting a really good underlayment in this case, because we've got lots of layers to this fly. But down in this bend section here, we want to make a good coating here, because this is where we're going to anchor everything to begin with. Okay. Okay. Now, here's a finished one. Very good shrimp pattern. Okay. We're going to use Flashabou of this type. And this is a very fine Flashabou, and it's got lots and lots of holographic nature to it. This one is kind of a pink. I generally find that the pink is probably the better in the if you're going to really make a shrimp pattern, the pink seems to be very good. And it has another aspect to it. If you were to hold it up to the light, it's virtually clear, but it picks up all those rainbow patterns. I taught scuba diving for many years, and shrimp underwater are almost invisible until they move, or some of them, like the peppermint shrimp and others, have little red banded stripes. So sometimes we overdo it, trying to make something look exactly like a shrimp, when what we ought to be doing is trying to make something look more like have that profile, but it needs to, I think, not be completely dense. I'm going to trim the tails off. Okay, wind over this. Now, on a saltwater fly like this one, a lot of times I'll use a product like super glue for my head cement. Take a little piece of bamboo. I like to kind of coat that down, get it into the fibers real well. I think it's always good on a saltwater fly to insert some little fibers of red. So this is a twisted red Flashabou. Just going to lay a few sprigs, maybe 4 or 5 in on top. Just catch them with a soft loop. Wind them down good and tight. You can pull the tails up and just kind of wrap the tails over the shank of the hook just to bind them a little better. Trim off all the waste. Little straggling piece. Okay, now I like to add a touch of copper. This is a copper and gold, depending on the color temperature of your light you're working under almost look the same. This one is kind of a copper or brassy looking. It's a little more orange than brass. The brass is kind of a more yellow. I think you're better with the kind of a copper. So we're going to lay this in on top. Catch it with a soft loop. Pull our little tails out of here. These flash UV fibers are kind of wild, so you do good to kind of keep pulling those back a little bit. And we're going to wind over it. We're not worried about it being a little bulky because we're going to build the body up a little bit anyway. Okay, now I have a mylar tubing. It's very iridescent looking. I'm going to come over the body this way, and I'm going to make it a little long. What I'm going to do is go ahead and do my little whip finish here and just tie that off. Now I'm going to slip the tubing over like this. I'm going to come back and restart my thread on top of the tubing. I'm going to bind this really good and tight with several wraps right in here. Okay, trim that little tail off. A lot of guys just like to snap that and break it off, and my experience with that is sometimes that works well, and other times it kind of makes a mess. I like to just trim it off. Now these are what are called fly rattles, sound chambers. There's lots of different brands of these, but these are glass tubes, and in them are a couple little fine shots. I don't know if you can hear it. Alright, shrimp in the water, every time they kick, they go click, 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 click. And so I think that a rattle is a very good thing to have in a saltwater fly, if it's a shrimp pattern for sure. Now what we're going to do is feed the glass tube into the tubing. And we're going to slide it back here until it's situated on top of the hook shank. Push it back in here about as far as we can get it. Okay, now I'm going to leave this tied here for now, and I'm going to catch another thread bobbin. In this case I'm just going to use kind of a tan. Again, this is like a Danville nylon. Danville is probably my favorite fly tying thread. It's just something I started using a long time ago, and just I've used a lot of the new types or different types, uni thread and some of the others, and I'm just kind of an old fan of the Danville. It doesn't get fuzzy if it gets nicked as you're working with it, and some of the others are real bad about fuzzing up on you. Okay, so what I'm doing here is just binding this tubing over the top of the hook eye. At this point I'm just going to go ahead and trim it off. You can feel the hook eye. I'm just going to trim it off just a little past the hook eye. Now this will just flare out like that. Couple more wraps. Place some thread off. Go back, and I'm going to do my whip finish in this area. And I'm going to go ahead and trim this off. Now, it's handy if you actually can leave that hanging and continue to work with the other thread, but a lot of times it kind of is in the way, so it's easier to just trim it off and then wind it back in a minute. So from here, we need some eyes in here. So I like the plastic monofilament eyes. You can go with bead chain eyes or dumbbell eyes. A lot of times when you're fishing saltwater, you're fighting wind and you're fighting current and you're fighting sometimes kind of rough or wavy conditions. In those cases, it's good to make it like you would with a clouser. Go ahead and put like dumbbell style eyes on it. So here what I've done is I've just taken this and caught it underneath like this. Okay, now I'm going to go ahead and twist it around more like where I want it. Then I'm going to start to figure eight it. And I want to reach around and hook it on that side and then pull it up here, and you're going to figure eight it back and forth like this over that top, continuing to kind of move it to get it where you want it. You don't have to worry too much about binding this in terms of worrying about it being so tight that it won't move, because once you put a little head cement on it, it's going to be stationary. Okay, so it's a little tedious to work these in there, and after you made several wraps, I'd do at least 10 or 15 figure eights like this. Okay, now from here I like to get an orange dyed peacock curl, maybe about 6 strands. You can let the tips that are thinner play out like this. We're going to insert it underneath. You can either thread it through the thread like this, or you can just tie it in. So I'm going to hold it like this, give it a simple catch, and then bind it right here. Now I'm going to pull these around and keep them underneath. And since I've got about 3 or 4 that can be distributed on either side, I'm going to take the point of the scissors, or you can take a bodkin, either one, and just move it around like that. That way you've got some on either side. Then it's good to come in front of the eyes, and a couple more binding wraps up under here, just to kind of help situate your peacock curl, and then come back on top here. Okay, at this point I like to pull these out. Do your little hand whip finish around here. Sometimes with your whip finish, it's good to get a second hand in there to kind of help keep your materials out of the way. Whip finish tools are wonderful tools. There's a lot of places where they're not really very practical. So no matter if you know how to use a whip finisher or not, you need to learn how to do it with your fingers as well for those times when it's not really too convenient to use. Okay, now from here I'm just going to pull these up under the body here, because I kind of want it to be like a fuzzy bottom underneath here. Okay, so I'm going to bring it up like that. I'm going to go back, and now you can either use tan, or you can go back with your red, either one. And I'm just going to come over that binding in there and catch it like that. Pulling it underneath. We'll finish it back same spot. Come up and trim that off. Now from here, usually kind of spread these back and trim them off about like that. From here you want to make sure that you head cement all your bare thread joints. So what I usually do is I'll use my my super glue in this case, and take a piece of bamboo or a bodkin and you take it and drop it right in between the eyes on your figure eights. That binds all this stuff together right in here to keep it from coming apart. Speckled trout, saltwater speckled trout, have got a pretty good set of teeth in their head, and it's easy to see that they were designed for killing shrimp. So you want to make sure that you have a saltwater fly tied together pretty good. You know, it doesn't hurt to have a little extra head cement in there. Alright, we turn this guy over, and then we have a shrimp pattern. It's a very good shrimp pattern. Now, sometimes what I'll do, if you want to make it like a peppermint style shrimp, you come back and you take your red thread and we go ahead and put a few more stripes. A few stripes. Go ahead and whip it in there. Sometimes we're not trying as much in saltwater to completely match the hatch type of thing like you do when you you're fishing freshwater situations. It's more of a emulate the configuration than it is to actually completely imitate the pattern. We want to emulate its motions. This type of a kind of a sur hook, when you strip it, it'll make this kind of kick like this, and it's really realistic looking. I also make these using a little smaller hook. This is a size 2, which is kind of a large hook, but it's a good size for saltwater. And if you can get these in a stainless steel, it's even better. Okay, this type here, I like to make some small shrimp patterns out of these, and they're really a wonderful pattern. You can see some of the other shrimp style patterns that I have in here. These are somewhat like what we're using now. These also have a copper wire or gold wire wrapped into them. These are of course crawfish patterns, but here, these are other shrimp patterns here. That's the shrimp pattern tied on the little number 10 red gamakatsu hook. Gamakatsu calls these octopus hooks. When you're finished doing your other stripes, you want to come back and apply a little bit more head cement into the windings. It's a little here, and trace it on around like that. Now to make these even more durable, you can use your head cement type lacquer and lacquer over the body What it does, it makes the tubing a lot more durable, and it gives it a real glossy looking sheen, and it makes it even more transparent in the water. You have to be careful in this area here where your hook eye is at, that you don't get cement in the hook eye. So what I like to do here is make sure that once I'm finished, that I take it, pop it out of the vise, turn it over, make sure that I can get something through the hook eye. The hook eye's clean. My father used to say that there's nothing quite so crazy and ridiculous as a fly fisherman standing in the middle of a river when the fish are flopping everywhere, fooling around with trying to clean the cement out of the eye of his hooks that he should have cleaned out before he ever put them in his fly box. So there we have. There's a peppermint shrimp. Hope you enjoy that one.